Welcome to the Deep Time Network and the Coronavirus Pandemic Town Hall. I'm Jennifer Morgan, your host and president of the Deep Time Network. On the Deep Time Network, we have members who are looking at the cosmic story as a grand narrative that is foundational for everything. Now, why are we here today? Only 1 month ago, we had a remarkable event with Brian Swimme, who is the author of Journey of the Universe and producer and host of that movie by the same name. Amazing event we had a month ago. And one of the topics we talked about was the power of the universe and collapse. Well, little did we know 1 month ago how much the world would be utterly turned upside down within 1 month. So on the network, we're looking at things inside of a deep time context and trying to think about how to use this crisis as a catalyst for positive change. So we want to explore that, but first we'll want to explore with Gail Arnold what is actually happening right now. First, let me explain Zoom. On Zoom, if you're new to Zoom, there are two ways you can look at the speakers. One is gallery view and one is speaker view. You just drag your cursor up to the top right and you'll see the option of gallery view versus speaker view. That is your choice. Now here's what we're going to be doing. As Gail's talking and Rich is talking and I'm talking, you can put questions into the Q&A box. And those questions will go straight to me, and then I will say them, and then we'll have the answers. But meanwhile, the chat box is enabled. So you can use that to talk to each other. You can put comments in there. You can say where you are. You can tell people what you're seeing, what's happening in your community. If you are sick with COVID-19, tell us what's happening. What are your symptoms? Do you have a story to tell us? So here again, to communicate with me and the other panelists, use the Q&A box, not the chat box. Use the chat box for talking to each other. Now, one thing is we've been receiving a lot of resources, an overwhelming number of resources. If you have a resource you'd like to recommend to everybody else in this meeting, put it in the chat box, because I will be sending everyone all the comments that come through in the chat box. So if you put a resource in there, it will get out to everybody. So I want to acknowledge the audience here. We have well over 250 people who registered for this event. And there are people in the United States, Canada, Spain, Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Indonesia, and so many more. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to introduce Gail and Rich, and Gail will talk for 25 minutes, and Rich will talk for 5 minutes, and then we will open for questions, and we'll conduct a poll. And we'll talk about some upcoming programs and resources, and then we'll plan to be finished by 5:30. So let me just read this one quote by Brian Swimme and Mary Evelyn Tucker. Could it be that our deeper destiny is to bring forth a new coherence within the planet as a whole, as the human community learns to align itself with the underlying dynamics of Earth's life? So, Gail Arnold. Gail has been a lifelong biologist and nature lover. For 20+ years, she led a research group at Rutgers working to develop AIDS vaccine components. More recently, she helped establish Rutgers Institute for Quantitative Biomedicine, bringing basic scientists from the many STEM fields together with physicians in an effort to help catapult the development of precision medicine. She now does freelance scientific writing and teaching of science. Dr. Arnold has a BA in biological science and psychology and a PhD in molecular biology. And Gail was one of our founding board members on the Deep Time Network. And she was there to sign our original articles of incorporation 7 years ago. Thank you so much for that, Gail. That was just great. And who would have guessed, 7 years ago, how incredibly important and useful your experience and background would be. Rich Blundell. Rich Blundell is an ecologist working at the interface of art, science, nature, and culture. His research examines how transformation happens across the scales of person, place, and planet. As a cultural communicator, Rich tells a scientific story of the universe that includes art and human creativity as natural phenomena. This work is grounded in the concept of ecological intelligence and is currently expressed through a traveling conservation series, Oika, Into the Artmosphere, a call for artists to change the climate of our minds. So, Gail.
Yeah, thank you.
Tell us what's happening, Gail. What are the projections? Again, everybody just put your comments in the chat box if you want to talk to each other. And then if you have questions and comments for me and the other panelists, put those in the Q&A box. Okay, Gail.
Well, thanks, Jennifer, and thanks to all of you who've come to participate. So, it's really been a dizzying time to make sense of the bombardment of information that we're getting about this new coronavirus. And it's obviously got a huge impact. There are a lot of missing pieces. There's a lot of misunderstanding. And so, I'm thankful to have the opportunity to try to clarify things for listeners and to, talk about some of the things that we can do. And, it's my hope that the listeners will do the same and try and help educate people about the situation and what we all need to do collectively as people. So, we've never seen anything before like this. And so we're really all learning together on a day-by-day basis. So I'd like to sort of give you a slice in time, which is now. So let me share my screen. And here's a picture of this new virus that's been changing our world. And let's see. So really out of the blue, this virus showed up last November when the first patients in Wuhan, China, started showing up with symptoms that were like the SARS virus, that stands for severe acute respiratory syndrome. And that became a pandemic back in 2003. And the following month, a Chinese doctor was telling his colleagues about this virus. And a month later, the Chinese government acknowledged the existence of this virus. And just weeks later, this virus was already out of control in China. And there were 23,000 Chinese people visiting the US every day. So you can imagine how this virus is spreading extremely quickly and already crossing the globe. And today, there are 300,000 cases, okay? This is only 2 months after the virus really started veering out of control. And it's in 167 countries and nearly 13,000 people have died. So we're looking at a major situation with lots of unanswered questions, but thankfully, we don't have to understand everything to be able to do useful things that can make a difference. So I'm going to share with you some things in the way of background, and then I'll share with you what we know about the virus and what we can do about it. So just to get everybody on the same page, I just want to make sure we all appreciate what viruses are. They outnumber us by far. They're these beautiful, generally symmetric, geometric assemblies of particles. They assemble themselves, and they're infectious, but they can only reproduce inside of a cell, whether that's an animal cell or a plant cell or bacterial cell. They're too small to carry all of the information needed to reproduce themselves. But what you can see, they have, this is a coronavirus here. It's got a great big piece of RNA inside, and then it's got a protein coat. And like many other viruses, but not all, it also has what's called an envelope, which is a lot like the membrane on the cells that it infects. And it's studded with proteins that help them get inside the cell. So really the job of a virus is get into a cell, make a lot of copies, and leave the cell and infect more cells. That's what viruses do. And some of these viruses actually become dormant in their hosts. And we certainly have some of those things like virtually all of us have Epstein-Barr virus, herpes virus. Most of us probably have chickenpox if we got infected before the vaccine. Here's some more beautiful viruses. And this one looking like a lunar spaceship. I mean, they're really lovely little things. They're too small to see with a regular light microscope, but more powerful microscopes and other methods have allowed us to generate these pictures. So basically, viruses live within virtually all living cells. It may be that there are no living cells without viruses. I don't know that that's known. But aside from being able to cause illnesses, viruses can also be good for us. And one of the things that they do that can be extremely useful is they're agents of evolution. By going in and out of cells, and by virtue of the fact that they mutate and they can pick up little pieces of other DNA and leave their pieces behind, they're agents of change. And some of those changes are for the better and some are not. They can actually protect hosts from other infections. They serve as sort of like a very primitive immune system to bacteria, for instance, that they infect. And overall, they support the balance of the ecosystem. And so, in our case, there are human cells and even more bacterial cells inside of our gut. And the virus infects both types of cells and is part of that balance. And I should just mention that about 5 to 8% of our DNA is actually derived from viruses. So you can characterize viruses by how related they are genetically. So you can make what's called a family tree. And this is a tree of a number of coronaviruses, including this new virus, which is called SARS-CoV-2 for short. And I should just say that, so this is showing how related their genetic material is. And you can see here that there was a common ancestor, and there are different, families within this family or subgroups. And so there's an alpha group and a beta group, and the coronaviruses, about 4 of them infect humans and cause cold viruses. cold symptoms. About a quarter of our colds come from coronaviruses. Also in the same family are the SARS virus that caused the SARS epidemic of 2003, the SARS pandemic of 2003, and also the MERS virus, standing for Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, which was an epidemic mostly in 2012. And the coronaviruses infect not only people, but quite a few different animals. They cause disease in a lot of animals. You'll notice very closely related to the virus that is infecting us are some bat viruses. And by looking at this kind of tree and seeing how similar the genetic material is, you can infer where the virus came from. It's sort of the equivalent of our fossils, if you will. So it seems that bats were the source of our virus, and their genetic material is about 96% identical with ours for their virus. That's not really quite enough normally to allow a virus to cross over into a different species. And it turns out there's an intermediate animal that did that job, which is the pangolin, shown here. It's sort of a cross between an anteater and an armadillo. And these are highly valued in China, both for meat, and their scales are really treasured for medicinal properties. And so even though it's considered illegal to sell these in outdoor markets, they are sold. And so probably what happened is bats would basically drop the virus in their feces, and the pangolins snooting around looking for ants and whatnot probably consumed some of those feces and got infected. And then one way or another, I don't know if pangolins cough or not, but one way or another, the pangolin virus became 99+% identical to the virus that we carry. And so we were able to get infected. And among the things that happens when we get infected is we cough out droplets about 3 to 6 feet away from us, and these droplets contain virus. So an average sized droplet might have 1 million viruses in it. And so what we have to really be thinking of is that where are these viruses? That's where the infections are coming from and going to. And we know that these viruses are stable on surfaces, for anywhere from like 1 to 3 days. A study came out just a few days ago showing, depending on the material, like cardboard about 1 day, plastic and steel, 3 days. And so the idea is if somebody coughs out a droplet and it doesn't get disinfected, and you touch that spot within, that time frame where the virus is still infectious, and then you touch your eyes, nose, or mouth, voila, you can infect yourself. And then you can do the same with others. And so basically what I encourage people to do is to think about where are the viruses. I mean, like imagine they're fluorescent and you can actually see them. Okay, so they might be on your doorknobs, they might be on your light switches or your refrigerator handles. You have to think of these things, and those are the things you need to be cleaning. And And you need to stop rubbing your nose and eyes and touching your mouth the way we're all so prone to do. So the real trick is to think about how to not share this virus. So symptoms that are actually rather unique for this virus are a combination of fever, cough, and shortness of breath. So the shortness of breath aspect reflects the fact that the receptors for this virus are in our lungs. And so that's different from the flu and common cold and allergies. We don't get shortness of breath. And in this case, we don't get congested and sniffly. It's about coughing and being short of breath. So who is at greatest risk? Well, these are depictions from, I believe, March 16th or something, but it's data compiled from China. Okay, now China is different from, say, the United States in that more people smoke in China that impairs the functioning of their lungs. So the numbers are a bit different, but the bottom lines are the same. So in this graph on the left, this is showing different age groups, starting with the youngest and with higher risk starting for the 60-year-olds, and then 70-year-olds and 80 and up. And so this is combined, and I should say, these are numbers not of people getting infected. Anybody can get infected. These are numbers of people who are at greatest risk of dying. These are the people who have died. So aging is a factor, and that's because our bodies basically get worn out and our bodies don't work as well, including our immune responses. And in addition to that, you might have some pre-existing conditions that would predispose you to being in the high-risk groups, like cardiovascular disease at the top, diabetes, chronic respiratory disease, abnormally high blood pressure, and certain cancers. These are all metabolic diseases that go part and parcel with weakening our immune system's ability to respond. People with these conditions generally have an elevated inflammatory response, which sets them up for really an exaggerated response, which can be very dangerous. So, what are epidemics and pandemics? So, I know you've all heard these terms, but I just would like you to understand that an epidemic is referring to when there's this sudden increase of an infectious disease in a particular locale. And this is usually caused by viruses that are already circulating among people. And they can sort of go underground for a while, and they can show up again for quite a few different reasons: change of weather, or new children are born who don't have any immunity. All kinds of factors can come into play. A pandemic is different in that not only does it spread further, but they're usually caused by viruses that are sufficiently different from the ones in circulation that our immune system isn't ready to fight them. They're just not familiar enough. And so it makes them more dangerous in that sense. And this slide is meant to help you understand what that means. So at this point in time, people are thinking that one infected person with this new coronavirus is likely to infect anywhere between 2.4 and 3 other people. And then those people will go on to infect another 2.4 to 3, and so on. And so this is actually an example of exponential growth. And in reality, this is tempered by the fact that at some point the curve is going to flatten out because you're going to run out of people who've been infected. You'll reach either the full population, or if there's a vaccine, you'll reach the people who were vulnerable. And it'll be a smaller fraction. So if people are vaccinated, this curve might be half as tall, something like that. And you can picture it in terms of people on the right. And this term herd immunity, some of you may have seen this in the news. It really describes what we're up against. If the people who are painted red are contagious, they can spread the virus to the people who are this sort of light yellow or tan color who are vulnerable. And over time, more and more people go from being contagious to now being immune because they've gotten better. And eventually, enough people are immune that it's not as likely that you're going to be infecting a vulnerable person. So at that point, you say there is herd immunity. And I'll show you where we are. Well, actually, sorry, I'll do that in the next slide. First, I'll just tell you a few things about this new virus, which is, I haven't said, called SARS-CoV, coronavirus number 2, following its SARS number 1, CoV-1. So, as I said, we can each infect others. That's assuming that we're not taking precautions and that there are no medicines and no pre-existing immunity. Compounding that, though, is the unfortunate feature that some people are symptomatic and asymptomatic and infectious. And that's thought to represent about half of infected people, which is one reason why I hope you'll get the message that even being around people who seem completely healthy, they may not be. And that is exactly why we're being told to minimize contact with others. And of course, especially if somebody has symptoms, but even if somebody doesn't have symptoms, they could be getting you sick, and then you could be getting somebody else sick. And so this is the part that I think is highly misunderstood. And so, in fact, I don't know if you've seen it. We're here, at least Jennifer and I are here in New Jersey, and starting 9 o'clock tonight, there's a state lockdown where we're only supposed to go out for absolutely essential things. And so, and unessential businesses are supposed to shut down. It's a serious response to the fact that this virus is spreading faster than we can address. So we have to clamp down. So, and in addition to this, somewhere between 0.7% and 4% of infected people will die from this virus. And this is impacted by the fact that our healthcare system is already getting flooded and we're not at the peak yet. So it's going to be flooded, and we've got to take action to basically have the gumption to minimize spread. And in addition to the things that I've just mentioned, we're also short on diagnostic tests, which means we can't even tell people who've been in contact with the virus that they have been in contact. Hospital capacity is an issue, and protective gear is in shortage. So we need to buy some time to get more tests available, to let hospitals expand into places like college dorms that are now empty and other facilities, make some makeshift hospitals, get some protective gear, especially so our healthcare workers can protect themselves. And I should have said, when I was talking about who's at greatest risk, it's the healthcare workers and the family members who are most intimately working to help people who are sick. So these are the real challenges, and this is what it's looking like right now. So a lot of us are in that exponential phase right now. And some countries, particularly China, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, and Hong Kong, which is way down here, it's not on this particular map, they have had the public will to really follow who is sick and get those people sick or exposed and get those people quarantined. And our society, we've always been free, and we don't like that as a society. And it's taking us a long time to accept that that is our social responsibility and calling right now, is to minimize the spread of the virus. If we can flatten out these curves the way some of our Asian partners have done, then we can see huge benefits. So I'm sure most of you have heard of flattening the curve. And this is just a very simple depiction. I just want to make sure you all understand that there is a real limit on how many intensive care units are available for people who really need hospitalization. And so if you consider the number of cases on the vertical and time on the horizontal axis, if we do nothing, we get this big peak that exceeds our capacity, which means that people will die who wouldn't have to die if we were working under this capacity, if we could actually serve these people. So the goal is to stay under this limit. And to do that, we need to use protective measures. So I'll describe some of these protective measures more, and I'm sure that you're all tuned in to some of these. They range everything from social distancing, from quarantining, not going where there could be infected people, washing hands, not touching your face. And ultimately, we want to buy time so that we can let people develop medicines and keep us under that level where we need serious hospitalization. So if we don't use any protective measures, a study from the Imperial College COVID-19 task force, where COVID-19 is the name of the disease, this task force just published a few days ago a prediction that if we don't do anything at all, this peak would go for about 3 months, and about 81% of the world's population would get infected. And actually that applies to Great Britain and the US. So that might be a model for more developed countries. And so anyhow, we want to buy time until we can actually get this pandemic under better control. So what I'd like to do is show you a few simulations that came from this study. And I want to caution you that just like us, they have incomplete data. Not, we haven't even been through a full cycle really of events with this virus yet. So this is making do with the best that we have, and it's making assumptions, some of which could be incorrect. So these are just a couple of simulations of what we might be able to do to control this virus and minimize the impacts of the virus on society. So you can imagine that some strategies are more stringent than others. And this picture shows a black curve where nothing is done. And on the vertical axis, we're really looking at the number of beds occupied in hospitals. And this red line, and well, the x-axis is time, the horizontal axis. And the sobering thing about this picture is this red line. This is a study done in Great Britain. The red line shows the number of beds that are currently available in the critical care units. That is about 3 beds per 100,000 people that aren't already in use for other things. So if you're talking about 275 people or whatever who can't have access to those units, the impacts are devastating. But you can look at other scenarios where this green curve, it is closing schools and universities, which is helpful. And it pushes things a little later in time. It buys us a bit of time. If you isolate people who are infected, that helps even more. And if you isolate people who are infected and quarantine people who've been exposed to the infected person, either in the same home or, if you're lucky enough, in a hotel room somewhere, which would be even better, you can make a pretty significant dent. And if you combine some of these, you can even get a better handle on it. And so you can reduce the peak by about 2/3 if you combine these things and have the number of deaths. But even if you do these things, this model would show that there would be 250,000 deaths in Great Britain and 1.1 to 1.2 million deaths in the US, which is scary stuff. And it also means we've got to do better. And so a more stringent model is shown here. And in this case, it's the same kind of plot. Here's we do nothing. But if we amp up isolating people who are infected and people who've been exposed and added social distancing to the general population, we can really knock that number down to the point where one infected person is only infecting one other infected person. So there isn't going to be a real increase. This peak is going to be flattened. And you can also do that by closing schools, isolating cases, and again, doing the general social distancing. And I might note that the general social distancing is not the kind of stuff we've seen going on until just a day or two ago on the beaches of Florida during spring break. Okay, this is social distancing, minimum of 6 feet apart, and best of all, just only when necessary. Now, I should point out this model, this simulation, the one beforehand took place over a 3-month period. This new one takes place over a 5-month period. and it really suppresses the virus. But if after 5 months you let up on the restrictions, the virus rears its head again. And so what that suggests is we have to further consider altering this kind of approach. And one that seems to be probably a very much more realistic approach. Nobody's going to be able to go inside for 2 years, not for 1 year, and maybe not for 6 months. So we need more adaptive strategies. And the idea here's a simulation where there's a 4-month period where people are using good protective measures, social distancing, ideally school and university closures. If there's been, high numbers of cases in that region, and different policies to really address what's going on in a given region. And when the peak drops back down, you loosen restrictions, you resume some normalcy in life, and you carry on until you're getting numbers from your local hospitals, which hopefully will have expanded by now, that their intensive care units are getting filled again. And people can decide amongst themselves, or maybe some commissions will be gathered to come up with some suggested cutoff points where when you exceed a certain number, you say, okay, we've got to go back into greater restrictions again. And one can do this and save lives and buy time. And so this study was suggesting that maybe over a 2-year period, it might be that as much as 2/3 of the time would need to be doing this kind of adaptive triggering. Might not look like this picture, but it has to be responsive to what's going on. And in the meantime, people are developing drugs, they're developing vaccines, they're expanding hospitals, they're getting more personal protective gear. They're doing all of these things. So this curve could look very different, but the point is it's responsive and it's more regional. So you don't necessarily have to be doing what's going on in some other country. You do what's happening in your area. So this is just a slide to give you a bird's eye view. I'm not going to go into detail, but to give you a bird's eye view that there are vaccines that are being tested, and there are drugs that are already made that have been made against other viruses, in some cases coronaviruses, and in other cases not, but they're being tested to see if they can be repurposed for this novel virus. And people have actually been getting some rather promising results. So this is a very encouraging thing. And it's, I might note, one of the things that differentiates us from the pandemic influenza, the influenza pandemic of 1918, when people didn't have medicines. And so between these medical interventions and some of the things that we've learned from the countries that have been really doing a good job of reining in the outbreak, and even from looking at data from the flu pandemic of 1918, we're more knowledgeable and we know how to buy time. And so we're better prepared for dealing with this. But and I should just, I know you've all seen this, but I should just go over a few things of what this all means in terms of how important it is to wash our hands. Our hands are the easiest way to touch our faces and infect ourselves. So avoid touching your face. Remember to wash your hands anytime you're touching something that could have those fluorescent viruses on them. Even, so for instance, I'm ordering my food at this point to come from grocery stores, so I don't have to go into grocery stores where I don't know how careful my neighbors have been. And I figure that's a safer risk. And then when the bags come to my house, I consider that they're potentially contaminated with virus. So I'm thinking, where's the virus? Okay, it's on the outside of this bag. I treat the bag like it's contaminated. I dispose of it, and or the box, and in a day or so that bag or box will be no longer infectious. But in the meantime, if I have to touch it, I know that, and I'm washing and putting things in the right places. I'm knowing what's touched it, and I'm just being mindful. And this is something I've had to do as a virologist. I worked with HIV. I had to know where every virus was back in the day when we worked with live virus. And so it's possible. You just have to ask yourself, where is the virus? And so you disinfect, you wash, you practice social distancing, you avoid unnecessary physical contact. Yeah, go outside for nice walks and things like that, and do the good things that you need to do, but just be mindful of where the viruses are. And what do you do if you're sick? You don't go in, you call your healthcare provider, ask them what to do. And the physicians will give us advice. And meanwhile, you can read on the CDC website what's known. It's a website that's been changing by the hour, and it's really highly informative. And so for my last slide, I just want to talk about our role in this crisis. So I viewed it today as my role to educate all of you about things that you might not be aware of in terms of how the virus works and how to be safe. And so my hope is that you will go on to educate those in your sphere to do the same. There are so many people who really don't know this yet. And the sooner we get a grip on it, the better the outcome. And so we also want to limit contacts with people to help reduce the spread. And at the same time, we want to keep ourselves healthy. Yeah, exercise, listen to music, be in touch with loved ones, with the people in your community. Take good care of yourselves. And we're going to support ourselves, and together we'll reduce the impacts of the virus. None of us can do it alone. Or I should say, we can do it alone, one by one, but the impacts will be exponentially greater if we do it as communities. And so it's really our imperative to help one another find our way through, and help one another to make this as manageable as possible, and to anticipate how we can learn from this and support one another and come through somehow more enlightened. So that's my story, and I'd love to hear what Rich has to say in terms of the bigger picture, not just the scientific picture of what we're in the midst of right now.
That's great. Thank you so much, Gail. Before Rich comments, I just want to make sure people know, because we're getting a lot of questions in the Q&A box. So that's fantastic. Put your questions in the Q&A box. And after Rich is going to talk for 5 minutes, and then we will have open Q&A. and comments that we'll just, take from everybody. Also, just wanted, some people are raising their hand, I can see. We're actually not using that function right now. So if there's something that you want to say, just put it in the Q&A box. Just put it in the Q&A box, and then I'll see it there, and then I can ask the panelists. The other thing is, feel free to write in the chat box anything you want about, if you have ideas about resources and things you're seeing in your own community, because I am going to send out these comments to everybody. So whatever's in the chat box, everybody will receive. Everybody will also receive all the questions, because I'm sure we're not going to be able to get to all of them. But please do go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A box. So Rich, help us out here. We need some positive energy.
I'll do my best. But I have to say, Gail, that's a very sobering presentation. I think, though, that you are going to be such a great resource for this conversation that I don't want to diminish any of the time that you're available to the people in this. However, I'll do my best here to bring some kind of big history, new story, deep time context to what we're experiencing right now. So just to sort of shift gears a little bit, very briefly. The first thing I guess I want to do is to just acknowledge the community that we have here. I come from the sciences, but I know many of the people in this deep time community also come from the sciences, but we're also a community, that values and accepts science, but we're also creative, affective, open-minded people who are comfortable with the metaphors that we can use to make sense of the science. And so you've presented us with some science, and I think the diversity of this community is one of its greatest strengths, that we're not just storytellers and educators, but we also have this scientific commitment to science. So the key thing here is about how the cosmic story can give us not only some perspective on what's happening now, but it can also give us some tools, some help, some concepts in dealing with the lived experience of this moment. And I really want to talk just briefly about how deep time, and if we really take the insights that we've derived from the cosmic story, now is the time to apply them on every level. And that means right now, as we seek to make meaning of this moment and to interpret it, but also how we might use this moment. And I think this is a good thing to do while we are in our self-imposed quarantine. This is the perfect opportunity for us to get serious about the world we would like to see created based on what we know through the cosmic story.
Can I just stop for a second? Gail, you need to stop the screen share. Okay.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. There we go. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Some people were commenting. Thank you for your comments about that, because I could see him, but apparently not everybody could. Okay, now we can all see you, Rich.
Yeah, so I just wanted to acknowledge that the community we have here is an incredibly powerful and empowered resource, and that right now is the time for us to get serious about the insights that the deep time story and what we know about the scientific narrative of the universe. How does that empower us, and how does that help us heal and sustain ourselves and each other in this moment? And I think probably the biggest gift of the cosmic story is this idea of continuity, that from the very beginning of the universe as we know it to this moment, there is a narrative thread that by being continuous, it touches everything that has happened and everyone that's a part of this story. That continuity is real, and we can see it being manifest on every scale. And so this, I think, is just a core resource for us in this time, is to consider how continuity works. And one other thing I'd like to do is to see if I can bring a bit of an ecological perspective to this problem, because I think it will help us. Ecological intelligence is a concept that drives my work, my research, everything. And normally I would have a chance to ask the group what ecological intelligence means. But in this case, I'll just give you two of the most prominent sort of interpretations that I get when I ask that question, what is ecological intelligence? And the first is, people will respond to say, well, ecological intelligence is what I see when I look out into the natural world. Like I'm looking out a window right now at a field, and this morning there was some deer out there, and they were doing what they do, and they were eating the grass and fertilizing, and there was just a multitude of ecological relationships happening out there. And those deer and the grass there and the birds and the light, the sunlight and the air and the water, all were playing a part in an ecologically intelligent system that was out there. And that's one way that we see ecological intelligence, is that it's out there. But then another answer I frequently get is that ecological intelligence is what I can manifest when I recycle, or when I choose to consume less, travel less, when I choose to participate in ecological systems in sustainable ways. Then ecological intelligence is something that's in me. And those two answers, I think, really express eloquently that ecological intelligence is out there, and it's in here. That at a very fundamental level, we are also a part of that system. And when we realize that it's not just something that's happening out there, that there's something happening in here that's deeply connected to it, that is a feeling that we can actually encounter. We can experience that feeling, and we can experience that feeling just through contemplative exercises, just by thinking deeply about how plants photosynthesize and where the light that drives photosynthesis comes from, and how this is all a grand inclusive story that we're a part of. These are the kinds of ideas and feelings, the emotions that come from that sort of understanding, I think are going to help us through this time, to make it through this time, and to be able to help each other and to heal. But also, an insight like that can really help us, because this is a time of change. In one way, it's not the end of the world, it's the end of a world. It's the end of a world that didn't have vast ecological intelligence written into it. And so this time that we have now is a time when we can start thinking about how we're going to manifest the insights of deep time and cosmic history. And so, just one last thing about this idea of continuity and taking that idea very seriously. A couple of years ago, I had to make a film about the turtle bone oracles, which is this ancient Chinese ritual for divining the future by taking these turtle bones or turtle shells and reading and interpreting the etchings within them. And over the course of the filming, I had to go into a Chinatown in Boston. And, I kind of pushed my way down into the underbelly of what was going on there. And this was years ago. And I remember encountering, animals that were, in cages and tied up, and they were it was just this cold, wet place, dark, and I'm sure they were confused, and I'm sure that these animals were distressed. And what continuity, this idea of continuity and ecological intelligence can tell us is that now it's sort of our turn to experience some of that. Like this is the concept of reciprocity, which goes hand in hand with continuity. If we really are on a continuum with the natural world, which we are, then it makes sense that our inner world, our psychological world, is reflected in the world that we create, and that what happens in that world that we create, like Chinese wet markets, is going to have a reciprocal impact on us through consciousness. See, this is the thing about the cosmic story, is that,
Rich, we've got a lot of questions here, so I just want to make sure that you wrap up there.
I'll wrap this up right now then, and just say that I forgot
Sorry
what I was going to say.
Yeah,
but that's good. I'd prefer to actually open the conversation to Gail, frankly.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much, Rich. And your whole inquiry into, a deeper intelligence, that this whole event is an invitation to a deeper intelligence is just so, so powerful. And I so appreciate what you've talked about to me and many others and here in this meeting. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
We have gajillions of questions here. Let's see. So, and these are practical questions. So, this is going to be a mixture of, the practical, how do we live our lives now? And then, the deeper questions that you're bringing up, Rich, about what does this mean for the future and how we see it as meaningful. Jim Potts asks, so should we disinfect each item that we bring from the supermarket? And what is the best way to do that? I mean, I've had that question. You go there and you pick up the cans and you bring them home. Are you supposed to be washing all the cans that you bring home?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I would keep in mind that, we're not going to get infected by one virus. It's really a numbers game. And so we don't want to go too crazy, but we do want to be attentive. So I have been washing my hands after handling cans and boxes and whatnot. And I've been washing my produce, which I wasn't doing because I sort of go on the opinion that if bacteria are doing a good job of eating this berry, then they'll help me digest it too, and they'll be good for my belly. But now I'm washing them, not with soap, but I'm just trying to rinse things off. We're not aiming for an antiseptic existence. We're just aiming to really get those numbers down so our immune systems can, just deal with things. And so, yeah, just wash, and, like I made up my mind, I'm not going to have raw fish right now. There are just certain things you can decide for yourself. I don't know that there's a perfect answer for any of these things. A lot of things it's really, nobody's tested this or that, but I would just assume that the outside of things could be contaminated and take some action to minimize exposure.
Yeah, thank you, Gail. So Julie Teed said, wow, Rich gave such incredible context to this. I haven't heard others speak as beautifully on this and have struggled so much with it. Thank you. And Lucy also said Rich was so good. Please give him more time to extemporize. We'll find, if we can come back to that after some of these questions. I just want to make sure that people have a chance to, get some of these practical things in too. What about fruits and vegetables? Are they safe? This is from Judy Freeman. And how should we be preparing them? Does cooking them kill all possible virus?
Cooking would definitely kill the virus. And as I said, I wouldn't wash them with soap. I would just rinse them and carry on.
Do the predictive models consider immunity gained by the people who have already been infected? Are we also considering a possible mutation? I read that China has had cases of reinfection. I don't know if they have worked on verifying the strains of these reinfected people.
Okay, so that brings up a few things. So the models have not been showing what happens if as people develop immunity, and at least not specifically. And I should have emphasized that better as we went through the slides. But as far as how long the immunity will last and whether or not people can get reinfected, I actually, I didn't see any convincing reports about people getting reinfected. And I would invite whoever saw that to share that with me, because I have been looking for that. Some of the other coronaviruses don't have long-lasting immunity. And that's a concern, which means that a vaccine has to do a better job than a natural infection in terms of eliciting a long-lasting immunity. So these are great questions, and it's unfortunately too early to say anything about it. But we should actually be starting to get numbers from very small groups of 14 to 100 people, whatever, within a number of weeks that will give us an inkling of what might be in front of us.
Gail, some people are asking if they can get copies of your slides.
I'd be happy to share them, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we will be sending that in a follow-up email. Rich, I hope you're preparing to say more, because there are a lot of people who want to hear more from you. Let me just see a couple more questions here. We have so many, but I'm going to pick out a few. Let's see. Masks are a priority for healthcare workers. Eventually, should we all be wearing them, infected or not?
Okay, so the most important ones to be wearing masks are the infected and the people who are helping them and could really be coming in contact with their droplets of fluid. There's simply not enough masks on the planet for all of us to be wearing them all of the time, and they're really not needed all of the time. They're needed for close contact exposures, and so we should not be ordering all of the masks that we can find online. We should be letting those go to hospitals. Maybe order a couple for your household in case one of your loved ones gets sick and or you get sick. But we should not be hoarding them, because they're really not necessary for our behaviors if we're especially going to be keeping 3 to 6 feet apart from other people.
Okay, let me ask one more practical question for Gail, and then we'll jump back to Rich, because we've got a couple questions for Rich. What is the geometry in the COVID-19 virus? Might there be a sacred geometric response to the COVID-19 virus and possible solution with this current pandemic?
Okay, so right off the bat, I can't answer part two of that question, but I can say that, like almost all viruses, this virus has just beautiful geometric symmetry. And it's it's a great big soccer ball shape, uh, very symmetric. The spikes themselves may not be distributed as symmetrically, but the actual coat of the virus is perfect. And, it's made of repeating parts. And so it's very uniform. And that's part of, how viruses self-assemble. These parts have an affinity for one another, and they can come together in the absence of any kind of special machine to build them. So there's some real beauty to that. But I don't know offhand, I can't think of how we can harness that beauty to combat the virus.
Okay. Linda Powell, I see you're asking about putting up the CDC website. We'll include that in the follow-up email.
Or if you can just remember cdc.gov, it'll get you there.
cdc.gov. Okay. Rich. Oh, this is from Stephanie Harris. Hi, Stephanie. Rich, does an example of ecological ignorance of our efforts to develop monocultures? Let's see.
Is that a question?
I guess that's a question. Is that,
well, I mean, it's a deeply systemic thing you're touching upon there. Monocultures are motivated by our need and desire to generate a lot of product, which is really driven by kind of an insatiable appetite in a way. And I think that it's a very complicated thing, complex thing, but it's also kind of elegant in that understanding the cosmic story and our part in that presents us a sense and a logic of belonging in a way that in many ways can counter the desire to fill in that sense of disconnect that we feel. And so I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but I do think that the monoculture ethos of monoculture is deeply embedded in a worldview of disconnect, obviously. And so by its very nature, understanding the natural history of us and us as integral to that is a natural antidote, to that idea. And yeah. So, and there are ways that happens that are deeply human. The way that we make sense of the world, the way that we interpret beauty, the way that we feel a sense of affection and belonging for the world around us. So these things are all very much intertwined, but of course, the monoculture is not ecologically intelligent. No.
Di Shear, this is for you, Rich. Di Shear from Australia, who's had a long association with the Deep Time Network. She says, my links with DTJN to date bring me to a sense that there is a momentous shift in consciousness, a new threshold in big history terms, in process. And my interest in spirituality over several decades brings me to a sense that we are in a new axial transition. This virus is a wake-up call that brings our economic, ecological, and everyday spirituality together. I'm fascinated as well as deeply concerned.
Amen. Amen. And I can't think of a better framework for the real grassroots work that we've got to do from now on to create a better world that's grounded in the reality that science is telling us about, you know, our deep interconnectedness. And I don't just mean the interconnectedness through biological processes or physical or chemical processes. I mean how our psychological landscape and the landscape that we create, social, cultural, all of those things, are deeply connected. And the pathos that we see out there is a reflection of the pathos that we all hold, even if we're not aware of it. And by the way, this is a fractal process. You know, everything that Gail talked about in terms of how viruses, you know, respond to the world, you can create metaphors that happen at the scale of interpersonal relationships. And understanding that and feeling that reality is the key to getting through this. And we will get through this. You know, we will get through this. There'll be some dark times, and we have to acknowledge that. But when we do, how can we implement the insights of Deep Time? And how can we use those insights to help get us through the dark times?
That's great. Thank you. Ellen Rosner says, much appreciation to Rich. He discusses a philosophy I share, but in my fear and anxiety, I have forgotten. I am going to go and remind myself of the cosmic story. Thank you.
And you can do that right from your window, you know, with the right mindset and the right sort of contemplative state. You can look out there and see the world and let it invite you into it, the relationship again. And that's the first step, really. And so, yeah, and I'm happy, and we can discuss this in some other way, but that is the work that I'm doing now. And so if anyone's interested in that, we should set up some way to make that happen. But I can talk about that with you separately, Jennifer, but we should.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We should follow up on that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we should shift gears now. I'm going to share the screen to show Rich's contact information, but we'll probably be doing something with you on the network too, right, Rich?
Yeah, I think it might be if I noticed a couple of questions about art. And art, I think, is a big part of this. And so if anyone's interested in sort of the artistic dimensions of this, you know, look into it and see if something there inspires you to get involved.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a poll, actually, that I'm going to, I know some people have had to go, so not everybody's here, but this is a poll where we're going to ask the question and you all can answer. The question is, would you be interested in follow-up programs in any of these areas? And so I just want you to select the areas that you would be most interested. Don't just go and click everything, because we can't do everything. So we want to do what people are really interested in. So for example, coronavirus developments and how to respond, ways to use this crisis for positive change, how to respond in education, implications, response in religion, calming meditation practices, the coronavirus and ecology, the coronavirus and staying healthy, the coronavirus and social justice. And I should have had one for coronavirus and art, but I don't have that. So put that in the chat. If you're interested in that, put it in the chat. Just say, I'm interested in, you know, art, a program about art. So I'm going to launch this poll, and you all can just go ahead and click the things that you would be interested in. And like that. Okay, everybody, go ahead. Click on what you want. Okay, there they go. Took a minute.
I see a lot of things in there about art, so maybe I'll just take a minute to explain how that works with us. The kind of art that OICA is generating or supporting and cultivating is art that manifests ecological intelligence. And so that's the kind of thing that is a practice, and it's the kind of thing that we can work on even in quarantine, because it's really about the relationship between you and the natural world. And I'm assuming many people have access to at least some tiny little sliver of nature, even if it's just a blade of grass. And the idea there is to really develop a practice that can articulate ecological intelligence through art. That's really what that's about, is how do we develop that as a practice?
Yeah. Okay. Well, as you can see in the chat box, a lot of people said art. So there is definitely a big interest here.
And on the other side of the coronavirus thing, and when we're already broken the spell that universal basic income isn't possible. Well, and reducing our carbon footprint to pre-industrial era levels, that's not possible. These are things spells that have already been broken now through this, which is incredibly hopeful that we actually can do this stuff. So this idea that if universal basic income, now that it's seen to be something that is actually possible, artists will have a whole new platform and motivation and capacity to create art. And if we can create ecologically intelligent art, then we've really started to turn our civilization around, I think.
Well, that's exactly what Lucy Lafitte here says, ecological intelligence through art. By the way, Lucy Lafitte is Vice President of the International Big History Association. Hi, Lucy.
Hi, Lucy.
So many people we know here. Well, as you can see, very enthusiastic response about art. Di, again, thank you, says, there won't be a return to life as it was. How do we prepare ourselves during these weeks, months of crisis for moving into new ways of being, new ways of thinking, understanding, new ways of relating? That really is the big question, isn't it? It doesn't look like everybody voted here, but I'm just gonna go end poll and share the results. So I'll have to sit and analyze this. It looks like ways to use this crisis for positive change is getting the most of all. But of course, the art taps into positive change, right? And so that's completely related. So art and positive change is like something very important.
I think for one thing, this coronavirus event, this crisis is it's snapping us out of a broken reality. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be painful. But the point is, it's showing us that our way of seeing and being in the world was deeply broken. And so that alone is a huge step toward positive change, because unless we realize that, we really don't know. We won't even know how to move toward positive change. And it's asking us to stop and slow down, which is the perfect opportunity to begin to notice the world that we're in. And if we can now have some time to study the cosmic story and how all this beauty came to be, we just have this new opportunity, this new invitation to participate in that story in a much more grounded way.
Yeah, great. Okay. So people are asking how to contact you, Rich. I'm just going to share the screen here with your contact info. Okay, everybody, let me move this over. Close this, close this, close this. So you can see, we're going to send you Gail's address in a follow-up email. For Rich Blundell, it's oika.com. And the Deep Time Network is dtnetwork.org. write to us at hello@dtnetwork.org. Okay.
The way I see this unfolding a bit, just in the short term, if people do contact me there's a form on my website, it will send me an email. I'll compile, everybody who's responded, and what we'll probably do is organize small groups, small cohorts, and we will have online sessions like this. I've also got a Trello board that I use as run like a course. It would all be free. And that's how that would get started. So be patient as I sort through all the emails and develop the cohorts.
Great, fantastic. Okay, so just a few more things and then we'll stop. We have a program that happens to be starting on Monday. We had this scheduled a long time ago, and it's a Journey of the Universe study group. Brian Swim and Mary Evelyn Tucker wrote the book, Journey of the Universe. They produced the movie, and they created many other programs around that movie and the book. And so we're hosting a study group, and it's a wonderful way to really jump into understanding cosmology, which is basically how we look at the world and how we see ourselves within it, how we see humans within it. And that starts on Monday. So I'm going to send a follow-up message with a link to that description on our site. On the 24th, we have a free event. It's Birth to Three, Beginner's Mind in Montessori Education. So the idea here is, how do we get to know the universe and see ourselves within it at every stage of life? Well, that starts right at birth. So this program, which is led by Darla Miller, I think she's actually in this program today. And she is a Montessori educator. It's going to be wonderful. That's on the 24th at 7 o'clock. So just go to the site and you can sign up for it there. We have a lot of bundle packages for schools and training centers. I will be sending a recording of this event to everybody who registered. And people can become members of the site for free. You just sign up for free. But if you want to become a premium member, and then you can start blogging, you can start posting resources, you can get access to all of the courses in the course catalog for free and discounts on lots of other programs. So I strongly encourage that. This is how we can support some of these free programs as well. And we're always looking for larger donors, because that's really important for paying for the hosting costs. And we have a programmer who keeps the whole show going, so we have to pay him every month. So they're large expenses. So if any of you have ideas about that, please do help us out. Again, write to us at hello@dtnetwork.org. And I think we're going to close now, unless there's any more comment that either of you want to make. No, okay.
I just want to thank Gail for being so articulate and clear. I think we really need that, and I just incredibly appreciate what you said.
Oh, thank you so much. And well, I also appreciate the beauty that you brought to this scary time, just from a very important perspective of staying connected to the beauty.
Yeah.
And thank you, Jennifer, for giving us this opportunity and for all the work you've been doing in creating this community. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah, and thank both of you. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so just one quote to say goodbye. This is a Thomas Berry quote. "We are not lacking in the dynamic forces needed to create the future." We are not lacking in the dynamic forces needed to create the future. We live immersed in a sea of energy beyond all comprehension. Well, with that, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world, good morning, and hopefully we'll stay in contact with all of you. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.